Welcome to the CJ Murray Podcast, an exploration of music and growth on a technical, philosophical, and emotional basis. Today's guest is Daniel Gowans, a senior in college studying percussion while composing and being well-versed in a variety of instruments. This is part one of a two-part episode series where we dive into Daniel's thoughts on the morality of music. This episode, while not as music-driven, is foundational to part two, where we fully connect the thoughts. Thank you guys for listening, and now enjoy this conversation with Daniel Gowans. Why do you love music, and what piece does it play in your life?
Wow. I don't know if if I've really pinned down personally why I love music so much. I think it's a very multi-layered way that you can grow as a person, figure out kind of who you are. It's a great way to connect with other people. You really are able to edify people and glorify God through it. And for me personally, especially as a Christian artist, those are the two biggest motivations for creating art, is the edification of mankind and the glorification of God. So there are many different ways in doing that. And everybody has their own philosophy. But I think maybe I enjoy music because it allows me to be it allows me to itch my brain just enough in the intellectual side of things, so that it's never dull, and things can continue to develop. But at the same time, there is something emotionally sensitive, like that I have to be emotionally sensitive to the point where it's not completely sterilized from humanity. Like, you still maintain that thread of the human nature throughout it, which is really, I don't know. I don't quite know if I'm explaining that well.
No, keep going.
But Seneca has this quote, and those who spend any time with me at all have probably heard me say it at least once, but art in its simplest form is an imitation of nature. And so for that reason, we get to have a chance to express our interpretation of the world through it to other people, and they get to have a glimpse into our realm to see how we interpret the world.
What has music shown you about yourself? Now, you kind of explained that. You said it, tickles that intellectual itch in your brain.
Yeah.
But unpack that. Like, what's it shown you about you? Like, and how you create it?
Yeah, so I think we all strive for authenticity in different ways. Music for me has always been a pursuit of authenticity, and I've really personally had issues with the superficial facades that people put up just to try to live in kind of this transactional relationship mindset that we're naturally inclined toward. And by that I mean we seek to build relationships with people for the sake of getting something out of it.
Right.
I want to connect with such and such powerful person in order that I might gain power as well. Or I want to be in a relationship with pretty person because I can gain some kind of lustful pleasure out of it. Right. Things like that. Some kind of a transactional relationship. So music, you can live in that kind of a facade, inauthentic, illegitimate way. And how you do that might be that you're always giving into, you might always indulge in what is immediately satisfying. The lush harmonies from the, like the 50s soundtracks for,
the classics.
Yeah, like those classic movies that you really love, that you grew up with. And I'm not necessarily saying that there's anything wrong with that, as long as it's done appropriately and, whatnot. But so music is, for me, a chance to pursue authenticity because I want to I want to edify mankind by creating music that is good quality, um, intellectually prodding. You know, it's not keeping people stupid, uh, or encouraging it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and then I ought to glorify God with it.
Huh.
You know, and so
Yeah.
those making it good quality and seeking to edify mankind
Yeah.
is a way that I can glorify God.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I want to come back
Yeah,
to that train of thought because I want to keep going with it.
sure.
But before we keep going, talk to me about what you do create as far
Oh
as
yeah.
composing and what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So when I was ever since I was really little, I kind of had some of that instinct to want to create music.
Yeah.
I don't remember this story. My mom likes to tell it. I guess, you know, and I think we all kind of did this. I don't think it's unique to me, but you know, for what it's worth, my mom said that I would take rubber bands and tighten them and loosen them
Oh,
all
right. To get
gradually.
pitches.
Yeah, and do like to create music that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think she remembers a time where I do that with like various different lengths of spoons or something like that. Like I
Yeah.
just kind of did that.
Or like you fill cups with water and
Yeah, you
kind
fill
of,
cups with water. Yeah,
Yeah.
you do the licking your finger and rubbing it around the rim or whatever.
Yeah.
To get that glass harmonica feel.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean there was some of that, but I started to compose music because I found it fascinating how pianists, in particular my aunt,
Yeah.
how pianists were able to understand the keyboard just and like be able to play it. And then I felt these I don't know. I felt the thrill of music. Like whenever I'd listen to something and I wanted to get involved in that.
Yeah.
Like I listened to it. It was fascinating. I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of, I was like, when I think I was kind of an arrogant kid because I'd listen to some of these composers and I'd be like, oh, they didn't do that right. Like they didn't,
My word.
like, I wish they had, I wish they had done this instead.
Oh,
But I
that's awesome.
was too young to, not that I was too young, but I was too musically immature at that point to understand what I would have done instead. I could hear it kind of. I mean, I could see it vaguely off in the distance, but I couldn't maybe quite pinpoint my finger on exactly what I would rather them do.
And that's part of like the purpose of school and like
Absolutely.
education.
Absolutely. Yeah. Having people, mentors, your peers that are a bit further than you, maybe your peers that are right there with you, understand what you could do and help you better reach that goal for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I began to compose. I started writing music when I was a fourth grader.
Cool.
And then gradually, you know, since then, as a senior in college now,
Yeah.
I've been writing for a little more than a decade. Well, it's been more than a decade now. Good grief. I don't know.
Time goes.
You can count the years if you
Time
want,
goes.
but yeah.
What's
Yeah, so.
to you? What's your most beautiful piece to date and why? And why?
I don't know. Define beauty.
Ooh,
Yeah.
nice. Define beauty. You know, I was talking with this about Coda.
Okay.
No, I was talking about this with Coda.
Mm-hmm.
Beauty.
Well, the way that you define beauty might be different from the way that I define it. So
absolutely. But
it's
like,
somewhat subjective.
but like, what I would say is, if something's beautiful, it tends to create more beauty.
Create or inspire.
I think it depends.
Yeah.
It depends. I mean, like here's an example
Mhm.
that maybe gets. I mean, I'm winging this at least.
Mm-hmm.
If we consider someone beautiful, if I consider someone beautiful
Mm-hmm. Externally, I'm assuming.
externally, well, I'm going all around.
Sorry, I'm interrupting.
You're
Go
good.
ahead.
No, you're
Yeah.
totally good. All around, we would agree that what real beauty counts is on the inside.
Mhm.
And part of what that entails is that they're beautiful on the inside, they would create or inspire beauty where they go. they meet someone, they're going to try and bring out the best in them.
Mhm.
Like there's givers and there's takers.
Mhm.
If someone's beautiful on the inside, they're not going to be taking all the time,
Mhm.
draining a ton of energy,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. So like, if we're talking beauty in music, it's maybe a similar principle where it's, you're talking about music that just isn't good. We could maybe define that as something that takes away more than it gives. Like, or gives, dude, I don't know where I'm going with this. Like,
That's
my
okay.
brain's trying to go deep, and I'm flatlined here. Just take the baton. I'm curious your thoughts, please.
That's okay. Frankly,
Oh,
I might
man.
take this in a different direction.
Yeah,
I struggled for me, and perhaps this is a bit more vulnerable than I need to be, but heck, we're on a podcast about being open about music and stuff. So,
Authentic.
yeah, all about authenticity, right? I just said that. I didn't say anything about discretion, did I? Just kidding. I've struggled with feeling the worthiness to be participating in beauty.
Mm.
I think part of that is we all as artists feel unworthy to some degree of the art that we're pursuing, because we compare, right? Like we're constantly striving for some quality that is higher, that is better, that is further than where we are right there.
Yeah.
And you compare yourself to people that are better than you strive for that. So that's part of it. And then the other another part, maybe it's not a twofold dichotomy, but another part of it certainly for me is growing up, I think there was some level, especially as the youngest kid, some level of always personally trying to strive for acceptance by my siblings, my peers, my parents, whatever the case. And it wasn't that I didn't have the reassurance. My parents have been extremely supportive.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I think that's enough to keep me going as a person. So I'm very blessed to have that. I'm very thankful for them. But on myself, I put a great deal of, you have to, if you don't meet this standard, then you're just not worthy of doing this thing. And I think that's a subconscious thing. So, in that, I think in that shortcoming for me, I really felt, and I have felt really unworthy of being able to appreciate beauty. And so, weirdly enough, instead of turning to seeking to find beauty in ugliness, it's interesting. Coda and I just had this conversation on the plane back from New York.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, he and I were sitting next to each other. When I frankly, we were having the same conversation about the whole worthiness thing, and his first response was, "Well, then the best thing to do is to seek the beauty within the shortcomings, within your faults."
Yeah.
I said, "Coda, that's great, but I was sick of that because I didn't want to pursue beauty. No longer was beauty even an option." So the next thought was, embrace ugliness, indulge in it, almost in the selfish kind of, selfish is fine, in a selfish way. And I'll tell you, that's not a great place to be as a person, especially as an artist.
Dark.
It's a very dark place,
Yeah.
and it's a very discouraging place. And I don't quite live in that realm anymore. But I was for a long time. And so, one has to even consider, is it even worth trying to pursue beauty? Is beauty something that is worth pursuing? And I would say that it is now for me. I would say that it's worth pursuing, but that's a hard place to get to. Especially if you feel unworthy of that. I had this really spiritual experience one night driving home from work. I work until 10 at night. And so I'm driving home and I'm listening to this piece of music. I'll turn on, I'm cool with, just about any genre. So whatever comes on is fine. Yeah. But stereotypically, as a classical musician, I was listening to classical music, and go figure. And I was listening to this piece, and I'm about 5 minutes from my house, and this overwhelming moment came up in the piece, and I lived it. You know, I felt it very deeply, and instantly there was this guilt, like this guilt of unworthiness, like
you wouldn't be able to recreate it in your own
yeah,
way.
yeah, like in a way that was like, you do realize that if you were to try to enjoy that, people would put you down for it. Like if you were to try to recreate that feeling in real life, like you just said, to recreate the situation that would lead you to that moment emotionally, people would put you down for it because you're not good enough. You don't meet the standards. You don't meet the criteria. You're not wealthy enough. You're not attractive enough. You're not intellectually intelligent enough. You're not talented enough. Like there were just all these things that just kept going one after the other after the other.
Yeah.
And gosh, I mean, what a depressing feeling. And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I'm
Absolutely.
I'm sitting there in my driveway, in my garage, whatever. No one cares. In my garage, just depressed. I was like, what in the, I mean, I thought I was done with this. Really, I thought I thought I had finished this
Like
out.
overcome
I
that.
thought I had overcome that.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I think I've got a little bit more work to do, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm still working on that. And maybe that's something that will just be something that I'll need to continue to work on. I mean, I'm 22, so I'm still relatively young in comparison to many
Absolutely.
people that are pursuing music. But yeah, I mean, certainly the question of why should one even pursue beauty to begin with in music? And that's a question that many artists, not just musicians, just artists in general, whether they be authors or, you know, painters or sculptors or playwrights or composers or, you know, whatever. Yeah. That's something that everybody has to encounter. And I think a lot of people throughout history have encountered, and cultural, you know, movements come and go, and still something that we encounter every day. Every generation does.
But at the end of the day, isn't it who you are? If you stopped writing music, do you think you could live with yourself?
Oh, maybe for about a year.
Yeah.
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 Because I don't know. I think composing is a way to. Composing is like exercising. You work out, I'm sure. You look like you do. I'm assuming you probably do. We've
today.
had this. There you go. Yeah, man. Right. So you have to work out in order to maintain the healthiness. Some days you feel great, you know, like you hit that PR or whatever, and like
you're in the groove. You got a good jam.
You got a nice pump. You're nice. Like it's arm day. Everybody loves arm day, but some days you got to do leg day. And that sucks, and you have no motivation. Like I was listening to Jocko Willink today.
Oh
like,
yeah, love that guy.
Yeah, and he had this thing where he was just talking about like motivation is an emotion, and just like every other emotion, you can't trust it. So you ought to go to the gym. For me, as a composer,
you commit, you do it.
You ought to compose. Yep, you do it because you need to do it. So, I've told people in the past I hate composing. I don't think I hate it. Some days I love it. Some days I loathe it, and I'd much rather listen to something or analyze a score or practice my instrument or something like that. I don't want to compose, but I ought to compose because it's the right thing to do. So,
you know, that all hard. Just, especially that last part, it just sounded so Jordan Peterson-esque.
I do keep my bedroom clean. That's the Jordan Peterson principle.
If you can do something good for the world, why not?
Why not?
You got nothing better to do.
That's right.
Oh, my word.
That's right. That's hard, though, you know, because...
Yeah.
Like I said, for me, that twofold thing is edifying mankind and glorifying God. And one of my favorite composer theorists was Arnold Schoenberg, and in his book, The Theory of Harmony, He has in there, he's so sarcastic and I love it. I'm here for it. He has in there this thing about how people don't want to think. People don't wish to think because it's too strenuous. So unfortunately, there have to be people who think for them. And the people that ought to think, that are going to think for them, it's not how it should work, but it's going to be inevitable. The people that think for them, you know, God forbid that they're stupid, you know. I mean,
yeah.
So I think
they're the leaders, really.
Yeah, and so like that, I think it should be everybody's desire to better themselves, and God has given each person the grace to do that to the extent that He desires for them to do it. But if your job is a teacher, which is what I'd like to do eventually, I want to be able to be maybe just a couple steps ahead of my student, never in such a way that I don't learn from them, but in such a way that I'm not easily influenced by them, so that I can help them and nurture them and have that kind of an influence in such a way that would be edifying them. I don't, Christian or not, okay, I don't care really. I mean, they're humans. So whether or not they decide to get saved, they can still be a good person that does good things for other people.
Benefits
and obviously
society.
Benefits to society. And my desire is that they get saved, but many might not. But that doesn't mean that I can't still love on them as a Christian.
Yeah.
And seek for their good.
And encourage them just really basic improvements in life.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can go up to anybody and be like, "Hey, do you want to come to the gym with me?"
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Acts talks about how Jesus just went about doing good, seeking for the good of mankind. Honestly,
is a really noble goal. There's something. Don't get me started about grading. I have the highest respect for teachers and grading, because that is just time away from the building. I don't know if I could put in. Now, granted, like, we put hours in on music.
We do.
That go above and beyond, but a teacher's heart for a student, a teacher's heart for a student is a really precious thing, and there's so much fulfillment to be found when you help someone and they improve, and you were the catalyst for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
I want to go back to that idea of, as you mentioned to me earlier today, morality and music.
Oh.
Have we touched on like snippets of that through our discussion, or
in this discussion? Not much.
Okay, start it for me.
Oh dear. This is a
summarize it for me in 5 minutes.
No,
I'm being a little tongue in cheek.
Fat there. Chance. No. Well, here's the desire. I ought to say, having had, I had a concerned teacher bring it to my attention that what was being communicated was teaching license, and that was not the case. That's not at all the desire with this perspective that I've been trying to chew on, really, and what the goal for the topic of morality when it comes to music is more so, let's be careful what we ascribe morality to when it's not something that is worth placing moral value on, then we shouldn't do it. And so with that being said, I don't condone license, but I've been thinking about the whole morality thing in kind of a threefold way.
In terms of music or in general?
Music, in general, but definitely so it applies to music.
Okay.
And this is why.
Okay.
But as kind of a bit of a background for the sake of it, I don't believe that the physical universe, so the material world,
okay,
the emotional world, and then the active worlds, those three combined, I don't believe that they inherently possess moral value.
Physical world, active world, and physical world?
Physical, active, and material.
Right.
Yeah.
Physical, active, material. What's the difference between physical and material?
Yeah,
again,
so
you're saying?
So excuse me, I may have missaid it. Emotional is what I meant to say. So material and physical is the same thing. My apologies.
Yeah,
material, emotional, and the active worlds. And so what an example of each of those would be exactly this. My cup would be material.
Okay.
It had coffee in it earlier. It's empty now. It's good coffee.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. The Emotional realm would be just that, our emotions. So love, joy, hate,
You
happiness,
loved the coffee.
pleasure.
Tastes
I
good.
like it. I like the
You
coffee.
felt good about it.
I wouldn't
It was
marry it.
emotional. It was the emotional world.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the active world would be my consumption of it.
Okay, so physical world was that cup of coffee. Emotional world, you felt good about that cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Active world, you drank the cup of coffee.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, following you.
Exactly that. So when each of those are sterilized from context, there's no moral value within it.
Sterilized from context.
Yeah,
So,
so
like take it
sterilized-
out of context
so you-
and it's amoral.
Yeah,
is what you're
exactly,
saying.
exactly. So the where I'm getting the word sterilized is from a peer of mine. She and I were chatting about it one time. She used that word because she was medical.
Okay.
She was a medical student, and she was thinking about how if you take a liver and you sterilize it, that's what they would call it. When you do that, it no longer functions as what it was created for that purpose.
Right.
But it's still a liver. It's still a heart. It's still a lung. It's still a toe. Okay, it doesn't matter. But it's sterilized from the rest of the body. So you have to think semi four-dimensional here, and by that what I mean is if you have it's difficult to explain. This is why I ought to take some. This is why I ought to take some teaching classes.
Can I just if you're having trouble explaining, I think we had this conversation a year ago.
Oh, did we? Okay.
I'm pretty sure we did.
Okay.
Let me say something, then you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because if I tell you what's already in my head, we may be able to
Okay, go for it.
go faster. So, so you're saying that you have the active, the emotional, the physical. If you separate the three, they're all amoral. But when you combine the three into specific context, that's when morality kicks in. Because the example, if I'm remembering right, it's okay, if we're gonna count war as a physical thing, okay, it's not physical, but it's not active, it's not necessarily emotional, it's just war.
Mm-hmm.
War, amoral. The Bible even says there's gonna be war, and it could even be over a very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for abolishing slavery.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we there's more to that story, but or a knife, amoral, physical object. How I feel about someone or something with that knife, okay,
Right.
now but if you combine the physical object with the feeling and an action, then you have some morality taking form in some way, some shape, whether moral or amoral.
Yeah.
Is that train of thought?
That's so those are we're getting into the nitty-gritty, and where I might say the morality lies might be different from what you're implying. I don't think that the action takes on moral value. I don't think that the object takes on moral value because of how it's used, nor do I think that the emotion takes on moral value.
Okay.
That perspective is hinging on the concept that the media, those are media through which good and evil is executed.
Okay.
But that the media do not take on moral value because of their moral neutrality. But there is a perspective, and I think it's a legitimate perspective, that perhaps those media are morally neutral. The neutrality of the thing would state that those media have the ability to take on moral quality, and depending on how they're used, whether it be according to conformity or corruption of God's original design, then that's what determines whether or not the object or the emotion or the action are good or evil, is good or evil. Grammar is tripping me up right now. But so I'm willing to say that that's a possibility.
Okay.
There's a third perspective, and that would be that the physical universe was created good. All that is created in the physical universe is good. For sake of time, I won't go into each of the perspectives, because there's the perspective that the Greeks had, that the physical universe was inherently evil and that the spiritual universe was inherently good. There there are a variety of different perspectives on the whole.
Right.
You're
But
kind of
what's your
dichotomizing there.
perspective?
Yeah, my perspective is just that the emotional, the active, and the material are inherently amoral. And the reason behind that is because we don't see anything in those that now granted, I'm not a theologian, okay, but we don't see personally from my study of the scriptures
Mm.
those things being able to be translated into eternity. We see all throughout the New Testament, especially because of whom Paul was writing to and whom some other authors were writing to, that a lot of them were writing to the Greeks, who had that perspective,
Romans, yeah.
exactly, that the material world was inherently evil. So you see in Paul's writings, especially, Paul will talk about how especially like 1 Corinthians 15 is a big passage, but Romans 14 as well, 1 Corinthians 8 and 10, these concepts of how the material world, what he'll say is, look, what is fleshly, what is material, what is of this world right now will pass away. And 2 Peter 3:12 and 13 might be 2:12 and 13. Because the numbers are similar in my mind, they're getting mixed up.
Yeah.
But we see Peter talking about, look, what is of this physical universe, what is material will not go on into eternity, but what is spiritual will continue on into eternity. We even see in Ecclesiastes that God has put eternity, the certain translations will regard it as the world, but in essence what it's talking about is we have this eternal nature within us. So the only part of mankind that is eternal that we're seeing daily, we're not even really seeing the eternal nature. It's the human soul.
Now, faith and works. Is there a connection to when Paul says, "Show me your faith by your works"? How there's a connection from the
James,
spiritual to the active, as you said.
Yeah. So that's a very good question, and actually, that's another situation where I'm willing to say, hey, maybe I'm wrong, because throughout Scripture we see that the authors will say like good works and bad works, and his deeds were evil, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean the judgment seat.
Yeah, exactly, right, for the saints. So like, so I think personally, what is being implied there is were your deeds according to the design that God instituted. But Jesus even himself is basically saying, look, it's not it's not in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, Matthew 5 and 6. It doesn't matter necessarily what you do. It matters, was it according to God's design? And even more than that, well, maybe not even more than that, but in hand with that, what is your heart's motivation behind it?
So let me frame that another way, and you can tell me if I have it right or wrong. Yeah. It's, you can do the right thing, but as the verse says, God desires obedience, not sacrifice. So like you can do a good thing, but if that wasn't God's will for your life, then really, was it good for you?
Well, God's will for, yeah, I mean, like I wouldn't say that to look at the whole God's will thing. I think God's will for us is just to do good, rather than necessarily to do one specific thing, but that we have to kind of like decode. I read a really good book on that by Kevin DeYoung this summer called "Just Do Something." Definitely recommend it to people in their 20s.
Just do something.
Yeah, but
what hath God required of thee but to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, be a good person. Be saved.
And I mean, be a good person. And you know, it can be surprising how many people are saved and
don't do that. Yeah. Look at Jonah. I mean, Jonah did God's will, but he did it with a bad attitude.
Yeah.
And
kicking and screaming, quite literally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and we see other prophets in the Old Testament as well that did the opposite of what God told them to do, and they were judged accordingly. But, frankly, if we were to think of it this way, if there was something absolute in any of these three qualities, simply all you would have to do is to with the material world, consume, possess it, with the active world, do it. Let's consider Galatians, what is it? Galatians 6, Galatians 4. Can't remember the passage specifically, but that's the active. And then an emotion that we could feel, we would simply have to do that thing in order to gain favor with God. But what does the Bible exclusively say? You cannot gain favor with God except it's through faith. So faith is a volition of the will. Faith is standing in the face of opposition and saying that you're still going to, you're going to deliberately oppose that. So faith, if I truly believe something, then I likely, when that faith, when I choose to act on that faith, then I will do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me get this straight.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, we think about life and even worthiness, for that matter, in the context of doing things, or we see someone do something, and that's just how we take it. But from God's perspective, he's looking at the faith that went into it. Like, your heart can be far from God, and you can be doing the right thing, but that's not really what counts. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
You got it, CJ. And I think I think that's a very biblical way to approach this whole. If there were something that you could do, absolutely, Pastor Edlin will talk about an absolute being something that is true for all places, all people, all times.
Yeah.
So if there were something absolute in the material, emotional, active realms, then again, simply all we would have to do is to do that thing or don't do that thing, and we could gain favor or lose favor with God. The issue with that is that you can't. You can only gain favor with God by faith. Because
actions aren't absolute.
Correct.
And emotions aren't absolute.
Yeah, so
and that coffee cup is not absolute.
Yeah, so let's unpack it just a little bit. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss this.
Yeah.
Because it's something that I think, if nothing else, is worth considering. I think it's another step that's worth considering.
Fair. Fair.
So the physical universe, Romans 14 is a great passage. Romans 14:14, easy passage to remember just because of the equality of the two numbers, 14 and 14. Paul says, "I'm convinced that there's nothing unclean in and of itself." So if we think about that passage in relation to the context of the think about that verse in relation to the overall context of the passage.
The meat, right?
Meat sacrifice to idols.
Yeah.
Is a big part of that. Even furthermore, Paul is talking about deference toward weaker brothers. So don't take the opportunity to indulge in your spiritual maturity for the sake of the downfall of another brother.
Like, if you loved hip hop, and to me, hip hop was going to keep me awake at night, thinking I'm a horrible person.
Yeah.
When I step in your car,
I better not have it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not that is the case. But I mean, I don't know us.
Yeah.
But
right.
That's what we're saying. But
that's the context. Yeah. And so, like I mentioned before, 1 Corinthians 8, 1 Corinthians 10 is a bit more specific about that concept of the meat sacrifice to idols. The best that I can understand it, Paul is either saying that there's nothing unclean, meaning that there's no moral value to the material world. And that's my best understanding based on how livable of an approach that is. Or he's saying that it's not unclean, it was created good. And the perspective on that is that in Genesis, when God says in like Genesis 1:31 or whatever the verse is, that he looked at his creation and declared it good.
Yeah.
Is he calling the material realm good? I don't think he is. I think a more...
There's also pre-curse, but I mean...
Pre-curse, exactly. That's
nature
a good
does
point.
reflect God.
Nature reflects God, right?
Albeit curse.
But it's... I would understand that passage to be... Understand may not be the right word. I might interpret that passage to be... he's referring to his creation design, the design as being good. And... I have reason to believe that, but if there's another that believes other than otherwise, that's fine.
Yeah.
I've heard
discussion.
Yeah, I've heard another perspective on that. A good friend of mine really does believe that it's that passage is referring to the creation of the world being and the universe being good, moral. And another passage that he uses to support that is that through Christ all things consist.
Mm.
And so a logical conclusion would be, well, if Christ is consisting all things, why would it be evil? And so that's that perspective. And so that's the material realm. The emotions, a great emotion that I really struggled with when I was younger was like, why does God have the right to be jealous?
Oh.
And I thought, well, jealousy is one of those things that is evil. We're always told, don't
Yeah.
be jealous.
Well, even like in a kid's mind.
In a kid's mind,
that's
right?
kind of where you're thinking.
Exactly, right. But we read in Scripture of times where God is called a jealous God.
Yeah.
And so I, in trying to better understand the whole moral, amoral nature of thing, I looked up the word for jealousy.
Yeah.
When there's a word that is, pardon my Greek, I don't know it. I don't know how it's pronounced, but it looks like it's pronounced kana, something similar to that.
Okay.
And that's strictly used for God.
Okay.
So man is not able to experience that kind of jealousy. I think what could be understood with that jealousy is that it's his rightful ownership to a thing and it's been taken from him, or at least it's for a time been taken away from him. We've wandered from him. The whole Hosea kind of a picture there.
Yeah.
Rightfully his, wandered away. But then we also see in the Proverbs another word for jealousy, and it looks very similar. It's also, I think it's similar to kana or khan or something like that, but it's used both for man and for God. And so the implication there would be whether or not we look at the first example, we at least see in the second example, God and man are able to experience this kind of jealousy.
Right.
Certainly we know that man is fallible, and we know that God is holy. But we know that jealousy is something that at least can be good, because God is always good.
Yeah.
So he's only going to experience that emotion in a righteous manner. But we also know that mankind is also able to experience that emotion in an unrighteous manner.
Do you mind if I try and like synthesize a lot of that?
Absolutely.
And you can kind of correct me. I think the way that I'm seeing it, and a lot of this is new to me and I'm processing as I go. So like material, emotional, active, you're saying that, all three are moral.
Mm-hmm.
However, though, God is absolute, and yet in himself, those three things are still contained. Because
God is a spirit, so he's not a material.
Yeah, but he's active.
Mm-hmm, he is active.
He is active. And as you said, talking about jealousy, has emotions.
He does, yeah.
And, just out of existence, I'm going to say he's physical.
There is a perspective that the physical and the spiritual are merely one and the same, and they just manifest themselves in different ways.
And I understand the context that we're talking
Sure.
about, but the point is that God is the standard on which those three in and of themselves, non-absolutes, can revolve around. So when we read God's word, God's going to speak to people in certain ways. And there's some things in the Bible that are really obvious.
Right.
Like 10 Commandments. I mean, how they're really
Don't steal.
cut and dry.
Don't covet your neighbor's wife.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't lie.
Don't murder.
Like really basic. And the 10 Commandments is almost like these are absolutes that those three non-absolutes can revolve around. It's the bowling ball guardways. Yeah. So okay, just don't do these things. And the Bible talks all about God's law as being, the guide. But let's see if we can segue this to music, because
yes, I have a goal.
I think I see where this is going.
Right.
I think. Let's start with the thought of culture, because let's talk about culture. Culture. A lot of cultures are centered around, as we just termed them, non-absolutes, right? I mean, different clothings. I mean, that's physical, right? There's different cultural traditions that have different emotions about certain things. You walk into someone's house with shoes on, and they may not care. You walk into a Japanese house with shoes on, they're going to feel a
Mhm.
bit emotional about that.
Mhm.
The revolving around, the non-absolutes, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so can you take this conversation to music and your thoughts on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So each of those three things
Yeah.
really is foundational to understanding what music is.